My name's Silverlock, and today I'll be taking on a Hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokemon Alpha Sapphire using only blue-colored Pokemon. Every Pokemon is assigned a single color of the Pokedex, usually based on the most prominent color in their design. As of the current generation, there are exactly 190 Pokemon classified as being blue, and a not-so-surprising number of them happen to be found in Hoenn, arguably the bluest region in the series. Some would even say infamously blue. So I figured Alpha Sapphire would be the perfect game to attempt a definitive blue Hardcore Nuzlocke experience. So for this run, I will only be able to catch the first blue-colored Pokemon I encounter in each area of the game. And along with the other typical Nuzlocke rules, I won't be able to use healing items in battle, I have to play on set mode at all times, and I cannot overlevel past the boss trainer's ace. So with that out of the way, let's start the run. Naturally, our very first teammate is Hoenn's blue water starter, Mudkip, who I name Lake. Mudkip also happens to be, in my opinion, the best starter out of any Pokemon game in terms of stats and typing, so no complaints here. But I do have a complaint about my next possible encounter. On Route 102, I have to spend an annoying amount of time trying to find a Surskit, which has just a 1% chance of appearing. I do finally find one and name it Bottle, and then on Route 103, I catch Jay the Tailo, who will be very useful early in the run thanks to her Guts ability. In Rust Turf Tunnel, I catch a Whismur named Cheese, but I can't use him just yet since he doesn't turn blue until he evolves at level 20, and even then, it's kind of a stretch. Loudred is definitely more purple than blue if you ask me. But hey, if the Pokedex says he's blue, then he's blue. So Cheese and his pink little body will have to sit out for the next couple of gym battles, the first being Roxanne and her rock types. Two of my three teammates are very vulnerable to her team, so it's up to Lake to take her on his own. And of course, he makes it all look too easy. He easily takes care of Geodude with a couple of water guns, and after he heals with an Oranberry after Nosepass brings him below half, I have Lake go for a Mud Slap to lower its accuracy to play safe, then a couple water guns easily seals the win. Badge number 1 secured. After dealing with the Team Aqua Grunt and agreeing to take on an unpaid delivery internship, I hop on the boat to Dewford Town, where I can grab the Old Rod, then head to Route 107 to fish up my next blue encounter, a Tentacool I named Sapphire. She also happens to come with a free Poison Barb, pretty handy. And against Brawly, Jay completely steals the show. By entering the fight already poisoned, her Guts-boosted wing attacks one-shot both his Machop and Makuhita, giving us an effortless second badge. Following the fight, Lake evolves to Marshtomp, and this run is off to a great start. The next fight against May doesn't go as smoothly though. Sapphire handles her Slugma easily with a couple water pulses, and even gets a lucky crit against her Grovyle, who goes down after a couple acids. But against her Wailmer of all things start to fall apart. I stupidly send in Jay, who can't do much with a wing attack without being pre-statused, and a couple water guns leave her with just 8 HP. So instead of switching to the much more powerful Lake, I bring out Bottle instead, who does decently tank a water gun coming in. But on the next turn, Wailmer traps her with a Whirlpool, and a Struggle Bug does not make enough of a dent. Worse still, Wailmer uses Rollout to immediately bring him into the red. Bottle heals with an Oranberry, but after Whirlpool damage and another turn of Rollout, Bottle goes down, giving us our first death of the run. Lake comes in and easily finishes the job, a reminder that expecting Bottle the Surskit to do anything at this point of the game was a total misplay on my part. A lesson learned. Moving on, I head to Route 117 to find our next blue encounter, Barry the Marill, who ends up having Thick Fat instead of the much more useful Huge Power ability. Definitely underwhelming, but Thick Fat does have its uses, which we'll see later on. Barry immediately evolves into Azumarill, while Cheese finally evolves into Loudred, who is now apparently blue enough to officially join the team. Meaning we're ready to take on Wattson and his electric types. Cheese starts the battle by bulldozing Wattson's Magnemite down to its sturdy, then I decide to keep him in even after he gets paralyzed from a Thunder Wave. It ends up working out though, as he fights through paralysis to bring it down to 1 HP again after Wattson heals with a Super Potion. Magnemite then Volt switches and brings in Voltorb, but Cheese fights paralysis again to bring it into the red with another Bulldoze. Voltorb uses Volt Switch too, bringing Magnemite back in, but Cheese just keeps fighting through paralysis like a champ, and finally takes it out. I again keep Cheese in as Voltorb comes back, but it just goes for a charge, and he once again fights through paralysis, so Voltorb goes down as well. Last is Magneton, and I decide not to keep pressing our luck. I switch to Lake, who negates a Volt Switch coming in, but a Supersonic in the next turn confuses, and he ends up hurting himself. But after a weak Magnet Bomb in the next turn, Lake immediately snaps out of confusion and lands a one-hit KO with a final Bulldoze, and just like that, we've earned badge number 3. We can now move on to the northern loop of Hoenn, and on Route 111 I fish up Tuna the Magikarp, who immediately evolves into Gyarados, which you could consider both a blessing and a curse. By adding Gyarados to the team, this run just became much easier. Jay then evolves into Swellow, and on Route 114 I catch a Swablu I name Sky. And after that is our first fight against Archie, which nearly devolves into chaos. I start with Sapphire against his Mightyena, who deals a good chunk of damage with Assurance, but an Acid Spray doesn't do much besides lowering its special defense. I switch over to Cheese, who tanks another Assurance a bit better, but a Swagger the next turn is just the start of how annoying this fight becomes. Cheese hits himself next turn, dealing a huge chunk of damage, so I have to switch over to Barry. But then it goes for another Swagger, but thankfully Barry fights through confusion to get off a couple Rock Smashes and finally take Mightyena down. Golbat is next, and I switch to Lake, who tanks an Air Cutter coming in, but the next turn it goes for Confuse Ray, and Lake hits himself. Golbat's Wing Attack the next turn gets a critical hit, and my heart nearly stops when he's left with just 9 HP. If he hurts himself in confusion, our starter is gone. But he manages to fight through, getting off a Rock Tomb to bring Golbat below half. Thanks to that lucky reprieve, I have the opportunity to switch to Jay, who can take Golbat out the next turn. Last is Sharpedo, so I switch to Tuna, who intimidates and takes just a little damage from an Ice Fang. But on the next turn it goes for, wait for it, Swagger, to confuse, and guess what? Tuna hits himself for a large chunk of damage. Fun stuff. I switch to Barry, who gets hit with a Screech coming in, then gets hit with another Swagger. And he, of course, hits himself. I'm having so much fun right now. Thankfully, Barry is a beefy boy, so even with the defense drop and the Swagger-induced attack boost, he can still stay in and take an Ice Fang, but he hits himself again. The rest of the team is not looking good after the confusion shenanigans, so I take the risk by staying in and trying to get off a Play Rough, which we do. Sharpedo goes down, and Barry barely survives on just 1 HP after a Rough Skin. And he didn't even need huge power. After that confusing nightmare, Flannery is thankfully a bit more straightforward to deal with. Barry takes care of her Slugma, but only after dodging the first Aqua Tail, setting up a light screen, and burning Barry with its flame body. Not ideal, but since her Numel is quad weak to water, another Aqua Tail can still take it out in one hit, even with the burn. So that just leaves her Torkoal, and rather than switching out, I stupidly go for another Aqua Tail. This time it obviously doesn't do much, and it uses Curse to up its attack and defense. I probably should have switched out at this point, but I keep Barry in to get off another weak Aqua Tail, and Torkoal sets up a sunny day. After that, I finally get my head straight and bring in Tuna. He doesn't have any water type attacks right now, but he doesn't actually need one. A Dragon Rage brings it into the red, and after Flannery heals, another Dragon Rage brings it to half, meaning Torkoal must have exactly 80 HP. So after one more Dragon Rage, badge number 4 is ours. I probably could have ended that fight a lot sooner, but a win is a win. Before we face Norman, I go ahead and grab the egg from the old lady, which hatches into a Wynot. Denon quickly evolves into Wobbuffet, but his only purpose is to serve as a backup in case things get sour. In a Nuzlocke, you take what safety nets the game gives you. After that, Sapphire evolves into Tentacruel, and we head back to Petalburg to take on our dad. His 2 Slackings are a well-known menace, and depending on your team at this point, they can either be cheesed easily, or will be the toughest challenge so far. In my case, it goes a bit both ways. I lead with Sapphire by setting up Toxic Spikes as his first Slacking goes for a Yawn. I go for a second Toxic Spikes on its Truant turn, just in case we need the toxic damage to get us through, as Sapphire goes to sleep, then wakes up right away thanks to her held Chesto Berry. Then I switch to Barry, who tanks a Retaliate, then gets to work with Dig. This allows Barry to dodge Slacking's attacks on its non-Truant turns, and while the damage is pretty bad, it is consistent and keeps Barry safe. But thanks to Norman's healing, Barry ends up running out of Dig PP, so I have to switch back to Sapphire. I make a little oopsie by going for Barrier on its non-Truant turn, as it goes for Yawn again, so I have to switch her out. I bring in Cheese to get off a weak Bulldoze that doesn't kill, but does drop its speed, allowing me to bring Sapphire back in, who can now outspeed on the next turn, and finally take it out with a Water Pulse. After all that, we're still not done, but thanks to the Toxic Spikes poisoning Vigoroth coming in, I go for Barrier to soften his powered-up Retaliate, then let off a powered-up Venoshock to easily take it out, leaving us with Norman's second Slacking. But after getting poisoned coming in, it outspeeds and lands a strong chip away that brings Sapphire down to just 9 HP. and I stupidly went for another barrier instead of just attacking. But a Venoshock on the next turn ends up getting a critical hit, bringing it down to the red, which allows the poison to finish the job, getting us a tediously hard-earned 5th gym badge. After that, I run into Steven, who gives us the Mega Ring, but I decide not to use it. Mega Evolution is very strong, and even if I limited myself to using it in battles where your opponent also uses it, that's like, 3 battles in the main story? So to keep things fair and challenging, I'm going to forego it this playthrough. Next I head up to Route 119, and with the newly acquired Good Rod, I fish up Gil the Carvana. He quickly evolves into Sharpedo, while Sky evolves into Altaria, and after more annoying swagger shenanigans against Shelly Sharpedo at the Weather Institute, and a much easier fight against May, we can move on to Winona and her flying types. Tuna takes the lead against her Swellow, who manages to land an Ice Fang after it tries to double team, taking it out in one hit. Against Pelipper, I switch over to Lake, and on the next turn a critical hit Rock Slide crushes it into the red, while the Water Pulse basically does nothing. Winona heals up, then Pelipper heals with Roost after another Rock Slide, and then the following Rock Slide brings it down to about half, so after it protects in vain the next turn, one more Rock Slide finally takes it down. Next is Winona's Ace Altaria, so I bring back Tuna to Intimidate and dodge an incoming Earthquake, then on the next turn another Ice Fang gets us another easy kill. Skarmory is last, but a couple Aqua Tails is more than enough to take it out and get us our 6th badge. After the battle, Lake finally evolves into Swampert, then we move on to Mount Pyre, where at the peak we can find our next blue encounter, a Chimecho? I can kinda see the blue tint, but growing up I always assumed it was white. Again, I don't want to call the Pokédex a liar, so yeah, let's just play along and pretend there isn't a Mandela effect thing going on. Cheese finally evolves into Exploud after invading the Team Aqua hideout, and then we take a detour to Shoal Cave, where I can find a cute little blue spheal I named Tooth. Tooth quickly evolves into Celio, and then we arrive in Mossdeep City to take on the double gym battle against Tate and Liza. It's important to note that while the level cap for this fight is 45, my team is a few levels lower due to the next level cap being just one level higher at 46, and there's a decent number of storyline battles before we get there. Of course, the reason the cap is higher is because Tate and Liza only use 2 Pokemon for this fight, so the jump in levels is just there to compensate. But it really doesn't do them any good. Solrock and Lunatone are not very powerful Pokemon, and the fact that my team of blues is naturally comprised of mostly water types, yeah, it doesn't take much. Gil uses Surf, Tuna takes out Solrock with an Aqua Tail after it tries to set up a Sunny Day, then a Crunch from Gil the next turn takes out Lunatone. Way too easy. And now that we have access to Dive and the Super Rod, I can get some more blue encounters, most of which I don't really need, but I might as well grab them just in case. I catch Dart the Seadra on Route 131, River the Whalmer on Route 130, then we dive down under Route 129 for Anemone the Clampearl. The real prize though is Lapis the Chincho, who I find under Route 124, but she has the Illuminate ability. Volt Absorb doesn't really see much use at this point in the game, but it's still a bit underwhelming. At the very least, her water-electric typing will be extremely useful for the future fight against Wallace. But first, we have the final fight against Archie to deal with. Sapphire starts with increasing her defense with Barrier, while Mightyena tries to lower her speed, but her Clear Body ability prevents that from happening. I go for another Barrier, then a couple Surfs takes it out, then a few more take down his Muck, who isn't really able to do anything to her. Crobat is next, and a Haze completely negates Sapphire's defense boost, while a Surf just barely doesn't do half. I decide to keep her in, and she luckily survives an itemless boosted Acrobatics, but another Surf isn't quite enough to take it out. So I decide to bring in Lapis the Lantern for her battle debut. She shrugs off an Acrobatics while taking Crobat down the next turn with Discharge. Last is Archie's Mega Evolved Sharpedo, whose opening crunch ends up getting a critical hit, taking down our newest team member. Just like that. There goes my perfect counter against Wallace. I should have switched over to Tuna right away to Intimidate, but I got greedy and overestimated her bulk. So I do bring Tuna in, and even after Intimidate, he takes a good chunk of damage from another crunch, bringing him concerningly close to half HP. A Stone Edge manages to connect to bring it down to about a fourth, and I decide to do the smart thing and switch over to Lake, who could just barely survive 2 more crunches, before letting off a critical hit Earthquake to end the fight without any more losses. Afterwards, to make me feel better about losing our main light source, Tooth evolves into Walrein, giving us a fairly bulky tank, and she ends up being a big help in taking down Primal Kyogre. Next, we could finally take on the 8th gym leader, Wallace, and boy was Lapis the Lantern the perfect answer to his water types. So, because of my negligence, Sapphire ends up having to pick up the slack in her place. Wallace's love disc starts by confusing Sapphire with a sweet kiss, but she fights confusion and manages to lay down 2 layers of toxic spikes. It naturally can't do anything substantial, and after shaking off confusion, Sapphire can take it out with a couple of Venishocks. And thanks to the toxic spikes, Sapphire proceeds to effortlessly take out Whiscash with 2 Venishocks, then Hyselios and Seaking with 1 each. Last is Milotic, and Sapphire just barely misses out on another one-hit KO, but after Wallace uses his Hyper Potion, another Venishock brings it into the red, allowing the toxic damage to finish it off. I'm not sure why I was so distraught with losing Lapis before this fight. I think I just really like using Lantern in a Nuzlocke run. With all 8 badges in hand and the Waterfall HM acquired, I can return to Meteor Falls in order to get our final blue encounter, a Bagon I name Azurite. Shelgon isn't blue, but it's not too much longer until she fully evolves into Salamence and turns blue again, just in time for our arrival at the Pokemon League. But before that, Wally finally steps up to give us a proper battle. His Altaria drops instantly with an Ice Beam from Tooth, and his Roselia follows suit. I switch over to Luke, who ends up getting burned by Magneton's Tri-Attack, but even that can't stop a single Earthquake from bringing it down to its sturdy. Magneton goes down the next turn, and then Delcatty gets deleted from existence by Azurite after she tanks a massive 18 damage from a disarming voice. Last is Wally's Mega Gallade, but after Tuna's Intimidate softens up a couple Psycho Cuts coming in, a single Aqua Tail is enough to end the fight. Wally finally got good, but not nearly good enough. Besides my usual dumping of my savings into buying vitamins, there's not much else I need to do to prepare for the Elite Four Gauntlet. My final team isn't too different from the one I've been using in the last few battles. First is my starter Lake the Swampert, our all-around decently powerful ground type who just needs to let loose hard-hitting earthquakes to get things done. Next is Tuna the Gyarados, notable for being one of the most broken encounters you can get in any Nuzlocke. With Intimidate, a massive attack stat, and access to Dragon Dance, he'll be nearly impossible to beat once he gets going. Third is Sky the Altaria, whose sole purpose is to be the team's emergency Perish Song user in case things somehow go sideways. Fourth is Tooth the Walrein, whose defensive bulk, thick fat ability, and ice type coverage will come in handy for a few of the upcoming battles. Sapphire the Tentacruel, whose special bulk, defensive typing, and general utility will help put the team in advantageous positions. And lastly, our newest member Azurite the Salamence, another Intimidate user, and our resident pseudo-legendary. Simply put, she's strong, fast, and a dragon type, and that's usually enough to find a spot on any team. So with a full squad assembled, it's finally time to face our final and potentially most difficult challenge of the run. First up is Sydney and his dark types, and Azurite starts by easily slicing through his Mightyena with a fly and a dragon claw, roasts his Shiftry with a flamethrower, then Sharpedo goes down to a dragon claw. Next I bring in Tuna, who manages to stay above half health after a critical hit Night Slash, then he takes it down with an Aqua Tail. Last is Cacturn, who tries in vain to delay its inevitable defeat with a Spiky Shield, before going down with an Ice Fang the next turn, getting us our first win. Phoebe and her ghost types are up next, and while I try to have Tuna set up with a Dragon Dance against her Dusclops, it ends up starting with Curse, putting a time limit on what Tuna can do. Either way, it falls to a crunch the next turn, and Dusk Noir comes out next. Knowing what to expect, I have to switch to Lake, who negates a Thunder Punch coming in. An Earthquake brings it below half, and an Ice Punch barely leaves a scratch. Another Earthquake takes it out, then her Sableye goes down to another one, and then her Bayonet as well. Last is her second Bayonet. You already know the drill. Another easy win thanks to Earthquake spam from Lake. Next is Glacia, and I start with Tooth against her first Glalie, who takes a good chunk of damage from a Surf. It does set up a light screen, so on the next turn I go for Rock Tomb to take it out. Next is Walrein, and a couple Rock Tombs manage to bring it below half, but after a couple ineffective Blizzards, it goes for Body Slam, which ends up paralyzing. Tooth gets fully paralyzed the following turn, but the next turn she does manage to get off another Rock Tomb before I decide it's time to switch to Lake. Glacia heals, then the next turn a Rock Slide flinches while bringing it below half. Another Rock Slide misses the next turn, but Lake tanks a Blizzard pretty well. Another Rock Slide connects, and Walrein finally goes down. Next is Frostlass, who just barely survives a Rock Slide after bringing Lake below half with another Blizzard. So I switch back to Tooth as Glacia uses her second full restore. It goes for Hail the next turn to make use of its Snow Cloak ability, and I'm a little concerned now that I made a mistake after Tooth gets fully paralyzed again. But even after getting confused with Confuse Ray, Tooth somehow finds a way to fight Confusion, Paralysis, and not miss with a Surf not once, but twice to take Frostlass out. Talk about lucky. And I would be pressing my luck by keeping Tooth in against her second Frostlass, so I decide to switch to Sapphire, who easily takes it out with a couple Surfs. Last is her second Glalie, who tries to do something with Freeze Dry, but it won't be enough to take down Sapphire. A couple more Surfs, and Glalie falls, and we get our third Elite Four victory. Drake is next, so I lead with Tuna against his Altaria to start setting up with Dragon Dance, but it goes for a Cotton Guard to boost its defense by 3 stages. So I go for a second Dragon Dance, as it lets off a pretty weak Dragon Pulse. A third and a fourth Dragon Dance finally puts Tuna's attack over the edge, so he proceeds with multiple Ice Fangs to completely destroy Drake's Altaria, Salamence, Flygon 1 and Flygon 2, and while it can't quite take out Kingdra in one hit thanks to his Salamence's previous Intimidate, it does get the lucky flinch, meaning Tuna can easily take it out after Drake heals. Another effortless Elite Four victory. And the Elite Four went down a little too easily for my taste, but I'm not about to complain, nor am I going to underestimate the final opponent of the run, Steven Stone. Let's see if we can end this run just as strong, or if everything below was all just a fluke. I start with Sapphire against his Skarmory, who sets up spikes after I go for Barrier. An Ice Beam the next turn brings Skarmory below half after a crit, while an Aerial Ace basically does nothing. A Surf takes Skarmory out, and next is Aggron, who survives the next Surf thanks to its Sturdy. It does retaliate with a Stone Edge the next turn, but that earlier barrier is definitely helping Sapphire tank some strong hits, so after Steven uses a full restore, a couple more Surfs finish the job. Claydol is next and sets up a Reflect, but after Steven uses another full restore, it too goes down to a couple more Surfs. Next is Cradilly, and his Sludge Wave does about a third, then it gets off a Confuse Ray the following turn. I decide to risk keeping Sapphire in, but she ends up hurting herself in Confusion the next turn, and a Giga Drain brings her down below half. So it's finally time for Sapphire to take a break as I bring in Tuna. An Ice Fang brings it down below half as Cradilly goes for another Confuse Ray, but this time Tuna manages to fight through and land an Aqua Tail to bring it down. Armaldo is second to last, and I swap in Lake, who tanks 3 hits from a Rock Blast coming in, then retaliates with a Waterfall to bring it into the red. A second Waterfall takes it out next turn, and now we're finally down to Steven's last Pokemon, his Mega Evolved Metagross. This thing is scary, but Lake, our starter of the run, does not give a shit. He proceeds to dodge a Zen Headbutt, land an Earthquake to bring it into the red, then survive a Tough Claws boosted Giga Impact with just 10 HP, before sealing our victory against the champion with one final Earthquake to secure the win and complete the run. I'm almost a little disappointed with how well everything went in the end. Hoenn has a surprising number of strong blue Pokemon available, and it clearly showed. I might need to ban Gyarados from future Nuzlocke runs, but honestly, there were quite a few others that could seriously take the MVP spot. Sapphire the Tentacruel and Lake the Swampert both deserve the accolades. Sapphire nearly soloed a decent number of battles on her own, and Lake in general was the definition of reliability from start to finish, including that clutch win at the end. And with that, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I would greatly appreciate it if you like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments what kind of challenges you'd like to see in the future, and as always, thank you for watching.